She inspected every tool like a tiny boss, making sure no one messed up. When a rescued bobcat marched into the exam room and slammed her paw onto the vet's wrist, no one expected what came next. She inspected every tool, supervised every move, and even placed her paw over his heart like she was the one in charge. But when her past resurfaced, her silly orders revealed something far deeper and far more heartbreaking. Ban tieng an ngon ngu bang dia mi. When a rescued bobcat strutted into the exam room and slapped her paw onto the vet's wrist, nobody expected what came next. She inspected every tool, supervised every move, and even placed her paw over his heart like she was the doctor. But when her old fears resurfaced, her funny little orders revealed something deeper and far more heartbreaking. Dr. Caleb Morgan had opened the clinic thousands of times before, but never had the morning light looked quite like this. Cool, slanting through the blinds, pooling across the empty lobby, as if waiting for something unusual to happen. He pushed through the exam room door with a quiet hum on his lips, expecting the usual quiet shuffle of paws from the kennels and the soft clatter of instruments on stainless steel. Instead, he froze mid-step. There, perched squarely in the center of the metal exam table, sat Maple, the young rescue bobcat who wasn't supposed to be out of her enclosure yet, gazing at him like she'd scheduled the appointment herself. Her golden eyes didn't flicker or dart away the way most wild animals would when startled. No, Maple watched him with a calm, almost managerial focus, tail curled neatly around her front paws, as if she were settling in for a performance review. Caleb blinked, unsure whether he should call for assistance or offer her a clipboard. Behind him, footsteps approached, and Olivia poked her head into the doorway, her expression melting instantly into a grin. "Well," she whispered, "someone's ready for work today." Caleb eased into the room, careful not to make any movement that might spook her, even though Maple didn't appear remotely spooked. If anything, she seemed annoyed that he was late. Her ears tipped forward as he approached the counter and reached for the instrument tray. Nothing out of the ordinary, just a simple setup for a routine check of her healing injuries. His hand hovered a few inches above the metal tray when it happened. A small, firm paw landed directly on his wrist. He glanced down in surprise. Maple's paw remained there, light enough not to hurt, but steady enough to send a clear message. Her eyes narrowed ever so slightly, locking onto his, the message unmistakable. Not that one. Not yet. Caleb froze, mid-reach, unsure if he had just been corrected by a bobcat. Olivia let out a sound that was half laugh, half gasp, covering her mouth with her hand, like she was trying not to encourage Maple's behavior. It didn't matter. Maple didn't need encouragement. She looked like she'd been waiting all morning to deliver her first order. "Maple," Caleb murmured, more to himself than to her. "You're not supposed to be running this appointment." But Maple didn't move her paw. She didn't blink. If anything, she leaned a fraction closer, making it abundantly clear that whatever he had been about to pick up was, in her professional opinion, unacceptable at this stage of the examination. Slowly, so slowly he felt ridiculous doing it, Caleb backed his hand away from the tray. Maple immediately released his wrist and withdrew her paw, settling back onto her haunches with the air of someone who had just averted a potentially disastrous mistake. Olivia snorted behind him, her laughter barely contained. "I think she's telling you you're doing it wrong," she whispered. Caleb shot her a look, but he couldn't help the small, startled smile tugging at his mouth. Maple had always been cautious since arriving at the clinic. Wary eyes, stiff movements, the kind of hypervigilance that told a long, painful story without a single sound. But this wasn't fear. This was authority, confidence. As if somewhere between trauma and recovery, Maple had decided she was no longer just the patient. She was the supervisor. He cleared his throat and reached again, this time more slowly, selecting a harmless cotton pad from the tray. Maple's eyes tracked the motion like a hawk watching a rabbit. When she approved, she dipped her chin once, then remained perfectly still as he approached her with it. Caleb dabbed gently at her fur, checking the area around her healing leg, and for a moment everything felt strangely normal, like she was simply another animal in for a morning exam. Then he reached for a second cotton pad. Maple's paw shot forward so quickly he barely saw it happen. Her toes spread, claws tucked but ready, and she pressed against his hand again, firm, precise, unmistakably intentional. Olivia couldn't hold back this time. She burst into laughter so loudly it echoed against the tile walls. "Oh my gosh! Caleb, she's reviewing your technique!" Maple flicked an ear back toward Olivia, as if acknowledging the commentary, but refusing to be distracted from her primary goal of managing the veterinary process. She held Caleb's wrist hostage for another long second, inspecting the second cotton pad as if determining whether he had chosen it appropriately. Only when she seemed satisfied did she release him again. Caleb straightened, inhaling slowly. "Well," he said quietly, "she's either extremely helpful or extremely bossy." Maple blinked at him, calm and unbothered, the embodiment of yes. And? He stepped back, taking in the scene. The cool overhead lights reflected off the steel surfaces, giving the room a sterile glow. But something about Maple's poised presence on that exam table shifted the entire atmosphere. She didn't look like a frightened wild animal anymore. She looked like she belonged there, like she had appointed herself the guardian of every tool, every step, every decision. The morning suddenly felt entirely different than the one he had walked into. Instead of routine, it felt charged with something strange and new, part comedy, part curiosity, part quiet awe. Caleb had treated wild animals for 20 years, but he had never once felt judged by one. As he reached for the next instrument, moving slowly and deliberately this time, Maple lifted her chin, eyes gleaming with intelligence and something else, something that made Caleb pause again. Expectation, authority, a hint of warning. Don't mess this up. And with Olivia laughing softly behind him and Maple staring at him like the world's smallest, furriest supervisor, Caleb realized something he never expected to feel at 8:30 on a Tuesday morning. He was no longer running this exam. Maple was. Caleb didn't move at first, partly out of caution, partly because he wasn't entirely sure what the new clinic hierarchy was anymore. Maple remained on the center of the exam table, sitting tall, steady, unblinking. Her gaze followed his hand like a laser, sharp, deliberate, and far too intelligent to ignore. She wasn't just watching, she was evaluating. Every tilt of her head, every flick of her ear carried a precise meaning, as if she held a checklist no human could see. Caleb cleared his throat gently, hoping to reassert some sense of normalcy. The room felt too quiet, save for the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead and the soft, rhythmic tapping of Olivia's pen against her clipboard. Maple didn't flinch at the sound. She simply shifted her attention toward Olivia, studying her the same way she had studied Caleb, as if identifying every potential variable in the room. "She's attentive today," Olivia whispered, not daring to raise her voice above a hush. "Like, really attentive." "That's one word for it," Caleb murmured. He reached for a small inspection light next, moving slowly, giving Maple ample time to observe. Her eyes widened just a hair, and the moment his fingers curled around the cool metal, Maple leaned forward, poised like she was ready to intercept if necessary. Caleb paused mid-air, raising his brows. "You gonna let me use this?" he asked softly. Maple didn't blink. Instead, she extended one paw, inch by inch, and tapped the top of the light. Twice, Her touch was surprisingly gentle. Not a threat, more like confirmation. Approved. Olivia snorted quietly behind him. Caleb, she's auditing your clinic. You know that, right? If Maple understood the remark, she didn't acknowledge it. She stayed focused on Caleb, steady and unyielding. He brought the light toward her face, shining it softly near her eyes, not touching yet. Maple didn't pull away. Her pupils narrowed at the glow, following the beam with a strange mixture of caution and curiosity. She was letting him work, but only because she had personally cleared the equipment. He leaned in to check the reflection in her retinas, murmuring instructions more for reassurance than necessity. Just a little light, Maple. We're just making sure everything's healing the way it should. Maple held still, frozen like a statue carved from tawny fur and muscle. No flinch, no recoil. But her eyes, those deep gold eyes, never left his face. She wasn't watching the test. She was watching him. When he finished and clicked the light off, Maple slowly relaxed, lowering her paw to the table. Caleb placed the light back onto the tray. Before it even touched metal, Maple's gaze narrowed at the faint click of the tools shifting. The tension hit her so fast it was almost invisible. Just a brief, subtle tremor in her whiskers, a tiny twitch in her shoulder. Then it passed. But Caleb saw it. He noticed everything today, because Maple demanded he notice. He moved to the cotton swabs next, selecting one with the same caution someone might use when defusing a small explosive. Maple tracked the motion, tapping her tail twice against the table's edge. She leaned forward and sniffed the cotton, tilting it with her paw, as if confirming it wasn't hiding anything threatening. Only after the inspection did she shift back, granting him permission with a simple blink. Caleb cleaned a small patch of fur near her ear, checking a scab from her earlier injury. Maple didn't interfere. She even lifted her chin slightly, allowing the examination with a regal air, as though she were granting an audience rather than receiving medical care. You know, Olivia whispered, it's like she's been through 1,000 checkups and finally decided she could do it better. Caleb didn't laugh. He couldn't. Something about Maple's intensity tugged at him. Animals behaved oddly in clinics all the time. Fear made them pace, aggression made them lash out, confusion made them freeze. But this wasn't fear or aggression. This was something else entirely. Supervision, guarded involvement, a need for control so strong it radiated off her like heat. Let's try the stethoscope, he said softly. He lifted the ongé slowly. Maple didn't tap this one. Instead, she watched the long tubing sway gently in the air, her eyes narrowing as if calculating every angle. When he brought the metal disc toward her chest, Maple leaned forward and tapped it once, so lightly it didn't even wobble. Another approval. Caleb placed it gently against her fur. Her heartbeat thrummed steady and strong beneath the soft coat. But Maple wasn't focused on that. She was staring at him again, intense and unblinking. Paw raised just slightly, as if ready to intervene if he tried anything unexpected. You're supervising, he whispered. That's what this is. You're making sure I do this right. Maple blinked slowly, confirming what he already suspected. As the examination continued, a pattern emerged, one that grew clearer with every step. Caleb would reach for something. Maple would inspect. Caleb would move closer. Maple would monitor. Caleb would pause and Maple would reassess. Her movements were deliberate, intentional, practiced. This wasn't random behavior. It wasn't accidental. It was learned. Caleb stepped back for a moment, pretending to read the chart while actually watching Maple from the corner of his eye. She remained upright, her posture calm but controlling, her gaze flicking between him and the tools like someone guarding a precious boundary. She wasn't scared. She wasn't confused. She was vigilant, a survivor's vigilance. He began noticing smaller details, the way Maple avoided sitting near the metal tray, the subtle tightening around her eyes when tools clinked, the instinctive readiness in her front paws as if prepared to block any sudden motion. These weren't signs of danger, they were signs of experience. Hard experience. Olivia moved slightly to the left to grab her notes, and Maple's head snapped toward her instantly. Olivia froze with her hand half raised. Is she judging me? Olivia whispered. No, Caleb said quietly. She's monitoring you. Comforting. Not for you, he murmured. For her. He set the chart down and approached Maple again, slower this time. He extended a hand, not to take anything, not to examine, just to offer presence. Maple stared at the hand, studying it for a full breath before lowering her paw to rest beside it. Not touching, not blocking, but acknowledging. Caleb exhaled. She's not just being bossy, he said under his breath. She thinks she has to do this. Has to? Olivia asked. He nodded slightly. Look at her eyes. She's not trying to take control away from us. She's trying to keep herself safe. Maple blinked, as though she understood the words. Her gaze softened just a hair, but only a hair, before she straightened again, posture firming. She was ready for the next step, ready to keep watching, ready to keep supervising, ready to stay in control of the pieces she thought mattered. Caleb lifted another tool, a simple tongue depressor. Maple tapped it once, then once more, each tap decisive and oddly dignified, as if approving a shipment of supplies for a factory she personally managed. I've never seen anything like this, Olivia whispered. Caleb had, but only in animals who'd been hurt, cornered, pushed past their boundaries. Animals who learned that the only way to survive was to watch everything. Everything. He placed the tongue depressor down and met Maple's eyes again. Something deep flickered in them, something old and worn and still healing. She wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of what might happen if she didn't supervise. Maple, he murmured, voice low. What did the world teach you before you came here? Maple didn't move, didn't blink. Her tail curled neatly around her paws again, and she held her ground, the way wounded creatures do when they've spent too long learning there are no guarantees in the wild. She had made herself the tiny boss of this room, because life had taught her she needed to be. And as Caleb watched her sit tall on that cold metal table, unyielding despite her small frame, he felt the first stirrings of something unexpected. A quiet ache, a protective instinct rising from somewhere deep. This wasn't just a routine exam anymore. This was the beginning of understanding her. Caleb stood a moment longer, taking in Maple's posture, every muscle poised, every breath deliberate, as though she were listening not only to the sounds in the room, but to memories that still lived under her skin. The sterile brightness of the clinic couldn't hide the faint marks on her body, the places where life had once pressed too hard. He had glanced over her rescue file weeks ago, just enough to know a wildlife officer had brought her in after finding her limping near the edge of Coconino Forest. But paper never captured the truth. Paper didn't show the small shiver that moved through her shoulders whenever metal clicked. Paper didn't reveal the quiet storms behind a pair of golden eyes. He moved to the side counter, picked up her chart, and scanned it more closely. There, in clipped handwriting, was the name he remembered: Tommy Hill. A field ranger who'd worked rescues with the clinic before. Reliable, steady, the kind of man who always told the truth even when it was hard to hear. And under that description was a single line that struck Caleb differently now. Found near wire snare. Injury several days old. He exhaled through his nose. Several days. That meant Maple had dragged herself through the forest, alone and hurting, trying to stay alive long enough for someone to find her. He glanced at her now, alert, intelligent, impossibly composed. and something inside him tightened. She had survived more than her file could ever say. As if sensing the shift in him, Maple tilted her head. The gesture was small, almost curious, but even that curiosity was guarded. She let him see only what she chose to show. "Maple," he murmured, "what happened to you out there?" The room didn't answer, but Maple's silence spoke enough. He approached her carefully, holding nothing this time, just his presence. When he reached the table, he let his fingers rest on the edge, letting her decide whether he was close enough. Maple sniffed the air lightly, not nervous, not afraid, just cautious, always cautious. "Let's check your leg again," he whispered, more like a request than a command. He reached slowly toward her injured hind limb. Maple's eyes softened, but her body stayed tense, not resisting, just monitoring. Caleb lifted her fur gently, revealing the faint lines he'd noticed from the beginning. The cuts were healed now, but the scars remained, thin, pale tracks that wrapped low around her leg, uneven in a way only a noose of metal could make. A coil of anger tightened in Caleb's chest. Not at Maple, never at Maple, but at the trap that had held her. At the raw fear she must have endured. At the idea that this young bobcat had spent days struggling against pain and hunger, uncertain whether help would ever come. Olivia, watching from the corner, stepped closer. "Is that from the snare?" she asked quietly. Caleb nodded. Maple didn't move, didn't shy away, didn't even blink. But her pupils widened just enough for Caleb to notice, a small, tremoring echo of remembered pain. He kept his voice steady. It must have been wrapped tight, long enough for swelling, maybe infection. He traced a scar lightly with his fingertip, not touching Maple's skin, simply following the pattern. She fought to get free. Maple lifted her chin, as though refusing pity. Caleb almost smiled. Even wounded, Maple didn't want sympathy. She wanted control, and losing it, even in memory, made her shift her weight with a subtle discomfort. "You were out there too long," Caleb whispered. "You shouldn't have been alone." For a moment, Maple's gaze darkened, not frightened, not angry, but remembering. It was the look Caleb had seen in many rescued animals, the look of a creature replaying something its body still understood better than its mind. Maple had been caught, trapped in pain she couldn't escape, her survival depending on unpredictable humans, and all she had left to protect herself now was vigilance, watchfulness, supervision. It made perfect sense. He leaned back slightly, giving her space. "Tommy did good finding you," he said softly. Olivia tapped the chart with her pen. "He said she was barely moving when he spotted her, just lying there in the grass like she'd finally run out of fight." Maple's ears twitched at Olivia's voice, but her eyes stayed fixed on Caleb. "She didn't run out of fight," Caleb replied, his throat tightening. "She saved it. Saved enough to get here." A long moment passed between them. A moment without tools, without procedures. Just a human and a bobcat finding a bridge of understanding. Then Maple shifted, lifting her injured leg just slightly. Not enough to invite touch, but enough to acknowledge him. Enough to say she remembered what had happened, and she remembered who had helped her afterward. Enough to say she had survived, even when survival wasn't guaranteed. Caleb rubbed a hand over his jaw, exhaling slowly. "Those scars will fade," he told her, "but I know the memories stay a while." He reached for a clean cloth, something soft and familiar that wouldn't startle her. Maple watched, but didn't intervene this time. He dabbed gently along her fur, checking the healed skin. Her breathing steadied under his touch, not relaxed, but no longer sharp with vigilance. She allowed him this routine, this closeness, because she had decided he had earned it. A small victory. Olivia leaned her hip against the counter. "You know," she said, "when Tommy called about her, he sounded shaken. Said she just stared at him when he approached. No hissing, no growling. Just stared like she wasn't sure if he was real." Caleb nodded. Because at that point, it wasn't about fight or flight. It was about endurance. "And she endured," Olivia murmured. Maple blinked slowly, as if accepting the truth in those words. Caleb lifted her paw gently to check the pads. Another scar, a much smaller one, ran across the edge of her toe, almost invisible unless he looked closely. Maple tensed for a fraction of a second, then settled. "You've been through more than a creature your age should have seen," he said quietly. Her golden eyes softened, casting a faint reflection of the overhead lights. She looked older in that moment. Older than pain. Older than the forest. Older than fear. As if she carried memories she didn't ask for but bore anyway. He let her paw rest back on the table. Maple straightened, lifting her head high, reclaiming the authority she had shown earlier. But now Caleb knew where that authority came from. It wasn't mischief or defiance. It was survival. It was learned vigilance. It was the understanding that the world could take power away in an instant, and the only way to stay alive was to stay alert. "That's why she supervises," Caleb said under his breath. "She's learned that if she doesn't watch everything, something bad might happen again." Olivia nodded slowly. "So she watches, because no one watched out for her." Maple blinked, calm again, reclaiming her composure like she was smoothing out her own spirit. She looked at the instrument tray next, her eyes narrowing, not in fear, but in calculation. She was ready to continue. Caleb gathered his courage and reached for another tool, a small comb to check her coat. He moved slowly, letting Maple see. She tapped it with her paw, the softest nudge of approval, then looked him squarely in the eyes. This time her gaze wasn't just intense, it was expectant. As though she were saying, "If you want to help me, you'll have to understand where I came from." He nodded, steadying himself. "I'm trying, Maple. I promise I'm trying." And for the first time since her rescue, Maple's shoulders eased, not from relaxation, but from recognition. A quiet truce formed between them. Forged in pain, neither spoke aloud, but both understood. The tools clicked softly on the tray again, but Maple didn't flinch this time. She simply watched him, unwavering, the small guardian of her own fragile past. She wasn't done teaching him. She wasn't close to done. And Caleb knew he was only beginning to see the layers of the little boss who had walked out of the forest and into his clinic with a survivor's fire still burning in her chest. Maple shifted her weight on the table, tail curled neatly around her paws again, posture straight and alert. The small moment of softness they'd found in the previous breath dissolved into something sharper, an edge returning to her eyes, a readiness pulsing beneath her calm exterior. She was giving him an unexpected glimpse into her past. But now that window was closing, replaced again by the instinct that had kept her alive. Caleb stepped back just enough to grab a new piece of equipment, a standard grooming comb for checking coat condition. But this time, deliberately, he moved faster than before. Not reckless, but quicker than Maple had come to expect from him. It was a tiny experiment, something he knew might unsettle her, but he needed to see how deep this watchfulness ran. The reaction was instant. Maple launched forward, not with claws or teeth, not with aggression, but with startling decisiveness. Her entire front half shifted in one smooth, practiced motion, and her paw came down over his knuckles like the drop of a gavel. Her muscles tightened just enough to halt his movement mid-air. His wrist froze against the cool table surface. Her golden eyes widened, not in fear, but in alarm. Her pupils flared, and her tail stiffened straight behind her, a rigid line of living tension. For the first time, he saw true panic flicker across her face, a flash so quick it barely existed, but strong enough to hit him in the chest. "Easy," Caleb whispered. Maple didn't budge. Her paw remained firm, holding him still with a message so clear she might as well have spoken it. Not fast, not ever. Olivia, across the room, sucked in a breath. She jumped like lightning. "Caleb, look at her eyes." He didn't need the reminder. He saw everything. Maple's entire being had changed. The calm supervisor was gone. In her place was a creature caught between instinct and memory. Her ears flattened. Her whiskers pulled back. The steadiness in her spine trembled so slightly it broke his heart. She wasn't guarding the instrument. She wasn't guarding him. She was guarding herself from something that existed years before he ever met her. "Hey," he murmured gently. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just moved too quickly." Maple held her stance for several long seconds, her breathing shallow, her chest rising only enough to prove she was still anchored in the present. Her paw stayed on his hand, like a lock securing a door that threatened to swing open. Caleb remained completely still. His entire posture softened, his weight shifting backward just a fraction to give her more space. He wasn't trying to reclaim authority anymore. He wasn't even trying to reassure her. He simply made himself small enough to let her reclaim her balance. Maple's gaze flicked between his hand and his face, searching, calculating, assessing whether he posed a threat. Her shoulders shook once, barely perceptible but unmistakably a ripple of fear. Then, slowly, painfully slowly, she eased the pressure on his wrist. Olivia whispered, "She thought something bad was about to happen." Caleb swallowed hard. "Yeah, and she reacted before she even knew she was reacting." They both watched as Maple stepped back, placing her paw firmly onto the table surface again. Her body lowered slightly, not into a crouch of aggression, but into a small, defensive posture she probably didn't realize she was taking. The kind of stance animals use when they're preparing for something they hope won't come. Her eyes darted briefly toward the metal tray. The tools still glinted under the bright lights, shining in the cold way steel always does, and Maple reacted to that glint like it was the sun reflecting off a memory she'd tried to forget. Her paw twitched, her whiskers quivered. She wasn't just reacting to speed. She was reacting to the idea of being helpless. Caleb inhaled slowly, steadying his voice. "Maple, I'm sorry. I should have known better." He reached for the comb again, but this time moved so slowly it was almost comical. Maple watched intently, her gaze tracking every micro-movement. She leaned closer to examine the comb. When she tapped it, the gesture wasn't gentle like earlier. It was a little harder, a little sharper, as though she needed to ensure it wasn't hiding a threat. After a moment of scrutiny, she allowed it. She lifted her chin again, giving him access to her fur, granted begrudgingly, but granted nonetheless. Caleb worked carefully, brushing her coat and lifting tufts of fur to check for irritation. Maple remained still, but her tail curled tightly around her leg, anchoring her emotions the way some people clench their fists when they're trying not to cry. He spoke softly as he worked. "You don't like fast movements. You don't like unpredictability. You don't like metal. And you really don't like being surprised." Olivia scribbled something on the chart. "She's like a trauma patient." Caleb nodded. "She is a trauma patient." Maple blinked once. Slow, controlled. She wasn't upset anymore, but she also wasn't fully calm. She existed in that fragile space survivors inhabit, alert, prepared, waiting for the next unpredictable moment. He finished combing, then set the tool down very quietly. Maple's ears twitched, but she didn't react beyond that. She seemed to accept that this phase was over. For now. Caleb stood again, stretching his back subtly. Maple tracked the motion, judging whether it was safe. When he relaxed his shoulders, she relaxed hers by a fractional degree. A shared breath passed between them, tense but connected. "Let's try something small," he said gently. He reached next for a cotton pad. Maple watched, inspected, tapped, approved. The rhythm returned. Not the playful rhythm of earlier, but a solemn ritual she was rebuilding piece by piece. As he cleaned her fur again, he spoke softly, almost to himself. "Something hurt you in a way that made you believe control is the only way to survive." He cupped her cheek gently with the back of his fingers. Maple didn't pull away. "And now, even when someone's trying to help, you have to make sure everything is right." Olivia nodded slowly. "She's not protecting herself from us. She's protecting herself from her memories." Maple's eyes softened the faintest amount, and she lifted her paw, resting it on the table near his hand. Not blocking this time, not warning, but hovering in quiet supervision, watching, participating, claiming authority over her healing in a language few humans understood. Caleb's heart ached. "I see you, Maple. I promise I do." The bobcat blinked once more, long and deliberate, acknowledging his understanding. She settled into a more confident stance, as though reassured he had learned something important. But then, in the next breath, as he reached for another tool, Maple subtly shifted again. Head forward, ears angled, eyes narrowing just enough to say, "Don't forget. I'm still watching." And in that moment, Caleb knew the truth of her silence. Her suspicion wasn't a wall designed to keep them out. It was a shield she'd forged long before they met. A shield that kept her alive in the cold shadows of Coconino Forest, trapped and alone, waiting for help that hadn't come soon enough. Maple wasn't being unreasonable. She wasn't being dramatic. She was being a survivor. And her suspicion was her language. A language Caleb was only beginning to learn. He stood there for a quiet moment, Maple's unblinking eyes fixed on him, with that sharp, attentive stare she wore like armor. Somewhere beneath it lived the frightened creature who had dragged herself through the Coconino woods, caught in wire and pain. But the version in front of him, the version sitting tall on his exam table, had rebuilt herself with vigilance and control. She wasn't timid. She was exacting. She wasn't passive. She was observant. She wasn't helpless. She was the one in charge. Caleb glanced at the array of instruments on the tray, each one gleaming under the bright clinic lights. Beneath their shine, Maple's gaze followed every edge as if memorizing them, testing him, measuring him. Her posture relaxed only when his hands stilled. It was as if the absence of movement gave her just enough room to breathe. But the moment he reached again, very slowly, Maple leaned in. "All right," he whispered. "We'll do this your way." He lifted a soft cloth from the tray, moving with exaggerated caution this time, letting her see each inch of travel from metal surface to midair. Maple tapped it once, then twice, each tap firm enough to announce her approval. She then lifted her chin slightly and allowed him to wipe along her cheek. The shift was subtle, but real. Maple wasn't just tolerating him now. She was participating, guiding him, teaching him the steps she needed followed for this strange little partnership to work. Olivia watched with a mix of amusement and awe. "Caleb," she murmured, "you're taking orders from a bobcat." "Pretty sure I've been doing that since she walked in here," he murmured back. Maple flicked an ear at his voice as though acknowledging the truth. Caleb reached next for the stethoscope, a tool Maple had already inspected, tapped, and permitted during earlier checks. She watched him pick it up, her gaze softening just a little. When he lowered the cold metal toward her chest, Maple leaned forward again and placed her paw on the disc, tapping it gently in a gesture that almost resembled patience. "She's coaching you," Olivia whispered. "She thinks she has to," Caleb said. He touched the disc to Maple's fur. Her heartbeat whispered through the tubing, steady, rhythmic, determined, stronger than when she'd first arrived. It was a sound that reassured him she was healing, even as her behavior reminded him how deeply the wounds had gone. Maple didn't break eye contact the entire time. He finished and slowly removed the stethoscope. Maple tapped the tubing lightly before he placed it back down, as if checking that he hadn't altered its shape or swapped it with something unsafe. "All right, Maple," he whispered. "What's next on your list?" Her gaze drifted toward the thermometer. He chuckled under his breath. "Not yet. I know better. You don't like that one." Olivia smirked. "She really has trained you." "She trains anyone who listens," Caleb replied. When he reached for a cotton swab next, Maple inspected it thoroughly, sniffing the tip, nudging the stick with her nose. Once satisfied, she permitted him to clean a healing scab along her ear. She didn't flinch. Instead, she turned slightly into his touch, surprising them both. "Well, I'll be," Olivia whispered. "She likes that." Caleb didn't speak. He was too focused on Maple's expression, the careful lowering of her eyelids, the measured way her breathing slowed. It wasn't relaxation exactly, but it was the closest she'd come to trusting the process. Then he made a mistake. Not a dangerous one, but a small miscalculation. He reached for another swab without pausing long enough for Maple to inspect it. She stopped him instantly. Her paw came down hard on his wrist. Not painful, but firm, an immediate correction. A reminder. A boundary. Caleb froze, then looked into her eyes. What he saw there wasn't anger. It was disappointment. "All right," he whispered. "My fault. I moved too fast." Maple held his wrist for another second, her eyes burning with a clarity that said, "We follow the rules. My rules." Only when he placed the swab back on the tray did she release him. Olivia whispered, "She's dead serious." Caleb nodded. Because in her world, structure meant survival. Maple tapped the swab with one delicate claw, approving it again, and Caleb resumed his work properly. This time she let him check her fur along her jawline, her neck, and around her injured leg. She stood with a dignity that made her look older, wiser, almost regal. "This is a test," Caleb murmured. "A test of whether I'll respect her limits." Maple blinked, slow and deliberate, the closest she ever came to saying yes. She adjusted her stance again, positioning herself in the exact center of the table. It wasn't random. Maple liked being where she could see every corner of the room, every angle of approach, every tool on the tray. Control was her anchor. Caleb reached for a new instrument, a harmless plastic gauge for checking gum color. He moved the tool toward her mouth, demonstrating it first. Maple studied it with deep suspicion. She tapped the handle once, twice, 3 times, before backing up half an inch. "That means you can proceed?" Olivia guessed. "Or that I'm on thin ice," Caleb replied. Still, he brought the gauge toward Maple's jaw. She opened her mouth a fraction, not enough for full access, but enough for him to check her gums. He leaned in carefully, murmuring encouragement. Maple did not resist. Her whiskers brushed his hand lightly, her breath warm against his skin. "You're doing great," he whispered. Maple stared at him for a long second, then raised her paw and tapped his elbow. Olivia gasped. "Did she praise you?" "I think she did," Caleb whispered back, stunned. This was how Maple expressed trust. In taps, in inspections, in supervision. Not in submission. Never that. She would never surrender control of her safety to anyone, but she would share it with those who earned it. The exam continued with this strange yet beautiful rhythm. Caleb reached slowly. Maple inspected. Caleb explained softly. Maple monitored. Caleb respected her pace. Maple granted tiny approvals. Then something changed. Caleb stepped back for a moment to mark notes on the chart. Maple followed the movement with her eyes, but something in her expression tightened. A wrinkle of unease ran through her brow. Her tail tip twitched. Maple? Caleb asked softly. She didn't answer, of course, but she shifted her weight, muscles stiffening, eyes darting between him and the tray. Her suspicion had returned with new sharpness. Olivia whispered, "She thinks you're skipping a step." Caleb frowned. Maybe. He reached toward her again, empty-handed, wanting to reassure her. Maple didn't step back. She stepped forward. Her paw lifted slowly, rising with a strange kind of authority, and she placed it, not on his wrist this time, but on the center of his forearm. The weight was gentle, firm, deliberate, a warning, a reminder, a request. It wasn't clear, but her eyes told the story her body could not. Do not rush me. Do not skip anything. Do not forget what I need. Caleb nodded with full sincerity. You're right, Maple. We'll do it correctly. Maple withdrew her paw slowly, satisfied. He reached for the next step on her medical checklist, and this time she didn't stop him. She simply watched, intensely focused, neck extended slightly, as though trying to read his mind. Step by step, approval by approval, Maple guided the exam back to steady ground. Caleb followed her silent instructions meticulously, learning the rhythm she needed. She allowed him to continue because he had proven, again, that he would not betray her expectations. When he finally stepped back, signaling the end of this phase of the exam, Maple held her chin high. Her vigilance remained, but something else flickered beneath it. Something far more rare. Confidence. Not in herself, in him. Caleb allowed himself a slow breath, grateful for the small victory. Maple watched him exhale, as if checking whether he had learned something meaningful. He had. The little boss wasn't difficult. She wasn't stubborn. She was teaching him how to earn her trust every single moment. And for the first time all morning, Maple settled, not relaxed, but content. She had tested him, and he had passed. Caleb let his breath ease out slowly as he stepped back, noting Maple's posture, the way her shoulders finally dipped just a hair lower, the way her paws rested deliberately on the cold metal table instead of gripping its edges. It wasn't relaxation, not by a long shot. But Maple had granted him a brief pause, a silent permission to continue. Her tail lay in a soft curve around her legs, her chin lifted. Her ears faced forward with wary determination. It was as close as a bobcat could come to saying, "Proceed." But even in this moment of peace, Caleb sensed a shift beneath the surface, a deeper tremor, something unresolved that vibrated inside Maple like a cord pulled too tight. He had felt it earlier, that quick flash of vulnerability whenever his hand moved too fast. Now he felt it again, but stronger. He reached toward the tray, careful as ever, fingers slow and telegraphed. Maple watched intensely, her gaze never wavering. The next item he needed was unavoidable, though he dreaded what he knew it would do to her. The syringe. Just a small one. Routine, essential, harmless in skilled hands, but not harmless in memory. Caleb had treated enough wounded animals to know which tools would stir the deepest fear. Needles were not inherently terrifying, until life taught you they were. He hovered his hand over the tray. Maple's pupils widened instantly, not much, but enough to reveal the fracture line running through her composure. Her breathing hitched. Her body stiffened, not forward this time, not ready to intervene, but frozen between past and present. "Not yet," Caleb whispered, even though she had not moved. I know, Maple." But he had to see something. He had to know if she recognized the syringe itself, or just the idea of something sharp. He touched the metal rim of the tray lightly, and Maple reacted with startling speed. Not a leap, not a hiss, not aggression. She simply stepped between him and the syringe. Her entire body inserted itself like a living shield. She lifted herself onto all fours, tail straight, spine tall, ears flat. Not in anger, but in alarm. Her paws planted firmly, as though anchoring the floor to keep him from moving. She stood directly over the tray, blocking it from view, her eyes locked onto his in a plea that came through louder than any sound she could make. "Do not. Please do not." Caleb froze. Even Olivia's breath caught in her throat. "Oh, Caleb." He didn't move. He didn't speak. He let Maple make the next decision. Her chest rose and fell too fast now, her breath shaky and shallow. Her whiskers trembled along her cheeks. The golden light in her eyes flickered between fear and command. This wasn't the supervisory Maple, the assertive Maple, the Maple who tapped tools like she ran the clinic. This was a creature remembering pain, remembering hands closing in, remembering and being able to stop them, remembering metal biting into flesh. The room seemed to tilt with the weight of that realization. Caleb lowered both hands slowly, palms open in front of him, in a gesture he'd used with dozens of traumatized animals before. "Okay. No needles," he whispered. "Not yet. Not until you're ready." Maple blinked once, a fast, jerking motion, not the slow blinks of trust she'd shown earlier. Then she turned her head, glancing at the syringe again, and a low sound rumbled deep in her chest. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't a hiss. It was a soft, trembling chuff. The sound of confusion, fear, uncertainty. A sound bobcats make when they are trying very hard not to panic. "Easy," Caleb murmured again. "We don't rush this." He stepped back again, only by inches. Maple's breath slowed just enough for her body to loosen. She remained between him and the tray, one paw edging forward as though guarding the one object that terrified her most. Olivia's voice was barely above a whisper. "She remembers the wire, and whatever someone tried to do to her afterward." Caleb nodded. "I know." He knew because he could see it in her eyes. Pain leaves traces. Even healing has a shadow. Caleb chose a different approach. Instead of reaching toward the tray again, he sank down slowly onto one knee. Maple's head jerked at the movement, but she didn't block him. Not yet. He lowered himself further until he was sitting on the floor, level with her paws. Maple blinked, startled by the sudden difference in height. She didn't understand why a human, any human, would lower himself like that. It confused her, but confusion was better than fear. "Hi, Maple," he said softly, smiling with only his eyes. "I know you think you have to protect yourself. And you do, you've done it well. You survived because of it." Her shoulders tightened at the word survived. "But I'm not here to trap you," he continued. "I'm here to help, and I'll wait as long as you need." Maple watched him for a long moment, her breathing still uneven. Then something subtle shifted, her tail slowly easing out of its rigid line, her ears lifting slightly from the tight pin against her skull. She stepped backward, off the tray area, though she kept her body angled defensively. It wasn't full trust, but it was permission. Olivia exhaled like she had been holding the clinic walls up with her lungs. "You're the only one she'd allow that from." Caleb didn't take his eyes off Maple. "Because I'm not trying to take control from her. I'm trying to share it." and Maple understood that. Some part of her did, at least. He extended one hand, palm up. She didn't touch it with her paw this time. Instead, she lowered her head and sniffed his fingers, the smallest, quietest gesture of vulnerability she had offered him all day. Then she stepped forward one more inch and nudged his hand with her nose. Olivia whispered, "She's letting you try again." Caleb nodded, but he didn't reach for the syringe. Not yet. He knew better now. Instead, he reached for something else. A pair of dull-ended tweezers used for cleaning around claws. Small, harmless, familiar to Maple. She inspected them, tapping the metal once with calm precision, as if acknowledging, "This is the part we can handle today." He cleaned her claws gently, checking for growth issues and debris. Maple remained still but attentive, her supervisory nature slowly returning. She tapped the tray again after he put the tweezers down, perhaps making sure he hadn't slipped the needle back into the routine. "You're still watching," he whispered. Maple blinked, intense and steady. She always would. Because something in the forest had taught Maple that sharp things, sudden movements, and hands she didn't understand were dangerous, painful, unpredictable. And maybe today wasn't about the syringe at all. Maybe today was simply about Maple showing him the depth of her fear, trusting him with the truth of her past, in the only way she knew how. Caleb placed a gentle hand on the table beside her, not touching, just present. "We'll get there," he murmured. "In your time. At your pace." Maple looked at him with a mixture of suspicion, determination, and something startlingly close to hope. Then her paw moved, slowly, deliberately, and rested on the edge of the table near his hand. Not blocking, not scolding, just being near. It was the smallest gesture, but it carried the weight of everything she had endured. And for Caleb, it was enough. He stayed seated on the floor for a moment longer, letting Maple decide what the silence meant. She watched him carefully, poised on the exam table like a queen perched above her subject, trying to determine whether he understood the significance of her small gesture. And he did. He truly did. That one paw resting near his hand, steady, deliberate, unafraid, was more trust than Maple had given anyone since the worst days of her life. He knew better than to move too quickly now. This was a fragile moment, and he needed to protect it the way Maple protected herself. Slowly, he rose to his feet. Not all the way. Just enough to take a half step closer to her level on the table. Maple's eyes followed him upward, her ears lifting slightly as if registering his intention. She didn't back away. She didn't tense. She simply waited. Caleb placed a hand on the table again, deliberately showing her it was empty. "We'll keep going," he murmured softly, "but not with anything sharp. Not yet." Maple blinked slowly, approval, or at least acknowledgement. He lifted a new item from the tray, a small padded brush used to check skin and coat health. Maple reached forward immediately, tapping its surface with her paw as if confirming its identity. Once satisfied, she allowed him to use it. Caleb brushed lightly along her back, watching her posture carefully, every rise and fall of her breath, every tilt of her head. Maple tolerated the touch well, leaning just slightly into the brush as though the motion soothed her. Olivia observed from the counter, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "She trusts you more than she wants to show." "I know," Caleb said gently, "and I trust her to tell me when I mess up." Olivia snorted softly. "She'll definitely do that." Maple didn't react to their voices this time. Her focus was elsewhere, turned inward. As Caleb brushed along her injured leg, she lifted the limb slightly, letting him inspect the skin beneath. Her scars were healing beautifully, thin threads of new fur emerging along the once raw lines. Caleb's heart tugged at the sight. This small creature had suffered more than most people ever would. Yet she sat here now with a quiet dignity, allowing him into her world one cautious step at a time. "You're doing great, Maple," he whispered. Her ear flicked toward him, a small but unmistakable sign she heard him. He set the brush down gently. Maple's eyes followed it, but the tension he'd seen earlier didn't return. Not yet. Instead, she tilted her head in a way that almost made him laugh. She looked expectant. "What now?" he asked softly, unable to hide his smile. Maple stepped forward with the confidence of a creature reclaiming her place. Then, without warning, she extended her paw and pressed it, firmly this time, against his forearm. Caleb froze, not in fear, but in awe. Maple climbed a step closer, her front paws perched at the table's edge like she was pulling herself toward him. Then she made a small, decisive sound, a chirp. It was soft, curious, almost questioning. "What is she doing?" Olivia whispered. "I don't know," Caleb murmured, breath caught in his chest. "But I think she's trying to—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Maple was doing something she had never done before. Not here, not anywhere. She was choosing proximity. Slowly, she stepped off the elevated edge and onto Caleb's waiting arm. Her weight settled onto him, not completely, but enough for him to feel the tremble of her muscles, the tentative strength in her paws. Her claws remained sheathed, her trust wrapped over them like a fragile cover. This wasn't dominance or control. This wasn't supervision. This was her testing something far more vulnerable. Caleb steadied himself, letting Maple place her faith, however briefly, into his hands. She walked down his arm and closer to his chest. Slowly, hesitantly, she lifted one paw and pressed it against his sternum. Olivia gasped. "She's checking your heartbeat." Caleb swallowed hard. Her paw was light, almost delicate, but the intention behind it wasn't. Maple stood perfectly still, her eyes narrowed and focused. She felt the rise and fall of his breath, the steady rhythmic thump beneath her pads. She listened with her whole body. "Maple," Caleb whispered, barely audible, "are you trying to understand me too?" Maple blinked once. Slow, deliberate, the closest a bobcat could come to answering yes. Her paw remained on his chest, grounding them both in the moment. Caleb didn't dare move. He felt a strange warmth spread through him. Soft, protective, humbled. The clinic room felt impossibly still, as though the entire world had paused to witness this unlikely bridge forming between them. After a quiet moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Maple eased her paw away. She stepped back onto the exam table, but her posture had changed. The tension was still there. She was Maple, after all. But it blended with a new steadiness, a new willingness. She settled on her haunches, tail curling lightly around her paws, watching him with eyes that no longer held only suspicion. There was trust in them now. Cautious trust. Earned trust. Caleb allowed his breath to return. He approached again, slower now, his movements more deliberate, respecting the rules Maple had laid down. She watched every gesture, every inch of his hand's path toward the tray. And when he picked up a harmless cotton pad, Maple only tapped it once, lightly, gently, as though reminding him that she was still in charge. But she wasn't afraid. Not of this. Not of him. "Okay," he whispered. "Next step." He moved closer, continuing her exam with newfound understanding. Maple remained calm, supervising, yes, but not controlling. She allowed him more space. She trusted him more freely. She followed the rhythm they had created together. Then he reached for the stethoscope again, holding it loosely. Maple didn't need to approve this time. She simply leaned forward and brushed her cheek against the tubing, an unexpected gesture that stunned him into silence. Olivia pressed her hand over her mouth. Did she just affectionately? Caleb shook his head slowly, overwhelmed. I don't think it's affection. Then what? He stroked Maple's cheek gently with the back of his knuckles. She didn't retreat. She's letting me know she accepts this, he murmured. She's letting me know she accepts me. Maple blinked at him again. Not slow this time. Not fast. Just steady. Then she shifted her weight and did something extraordinary. She moved closer, stepping, not away from the tray, not into a defensive stance, but toward him. She stood near the edge of the table and nudged his arm lightly with her nose. Olivia whispered, She wants something. Caleb nodded. Yeah, she wants partnership. He placed his hand beside her, palm up, not touching her. Maple lowered her head again and rested her paw in his hand for the briefest moment. A fleeting, fragile gift. A tremor ran through his chest. You're safe here, Maple, he whispered. I'll make sure of it. She withdrew her paw and straightened her back, dignity restored. Then, almost ceremonially, she turned her head toward the instrument tray and tapped the edge with her paw. It wasn't fear. It wasn't warning. It was instruction, her way of saying, we will continue, but together. And Caleb nodded, fully understanding her now. The exam wasn't about medical steps anymore. It was about learning each other's boundaries. It was about healing the invisible wounds the forest had carved into her spirit. Maple watched him pick up the next instrument. She allowed it. She trusted him again, and this time, she didn't just supervise the process. She guided him through it, one silent, precious approval at a time. Caleb felt something inside him settle, a quiet realization that Maple was no longer reacting out of pure instinct. She was choosing him, again and again, with each measured pause and each gentle tap of her paw. Her trust wasn't blind, nor simple, nor given lightly. It was built in layers, shaped by a past full of sharp edges, and earned only through patience. He moved through the next steps of the exam with deliberate grace. He let her watch. He let her dictate the pace, and Maple, in turn, let him close the distance between fear and healing. All right, sweetheart, he murmured, picking up another harmless tool. Just a simple check. Maple watched, inspecting every angle of his hand, but this time the tension in her shoulders softened sooner. She shifted slightly so he could reach her ribs more easily, her tail curling neatly around her paws, like a small banner of dignity. She didn't tap the tool this time. Instead, she gave a subtle nod of her chin, one of her newly invented signals of approval. Olivia leaned forward from the counter in disbelief. Is she giving you permission without touching it first? Caleb smiled faintly. I think she's learning that not everything needs inspection. Maple blinked slowly, as if correcting him. Not everything, just most things. He checked her breathing next, placing his palm lightly against her side. Maple didn't flinch. Her breathing flowed in steady, even waves beneath his hand. Her fur was warm, clean, and softer than he expected. She let him lift her side gently, let him brush along her ribs, let him lean closer to hear her breath better. She even angled her body to help him. The Maple from 2 weeks ago would have bolted, or hissed, or buried herself in a corner. This Maple stayed. When he finished, Maple reached forward and tapped his sleeve. Not assertively, but with a soft, quiet touch. Her golden eyes held something new, something almost tender. For a moment, Caleb felt the weight of that small gesture hit him harder than any words could. You're telling me good job, he whispered. Maple looked away as though embarrassed by the interpretation. He chuckled under his breath. That's all right. I'll take it. But there was still one step left. the blood draw. He hesitated, staring at the syringe on the tray. Maple followed his gaze, her body tightening just barely. The air in the room changed. Heavy, colder, charged with memory. Olivia straightened, sensing the shift. "You'll need to narrate everything," she whispered. "Every single step." "I know." He slowly reached out his hand, not for the syringe yet, but for Maple's attention. She watched him with unwavering focus as he approached. He rested his hand on the table a few inches from her paw, palm up, giving her the chance to decide whether this could continue. Maple placed her paw on his wrist, but this time, it wasn't a warning. It was a grounding touch, a request, a question. "Are we doing this together?" Caleb met her eyes and nodded once. "Yes, together." He moved his other hand toward the syringe. Maple's paw tensed on his wrist, not enough to stop him completely, but enough to remind him that her fear lived close beneath the surface. She didn't chirp, didn't chuff, didn't recoil. She simply braced herself, like a creature preparing for something it wasn't sure it could handle but was willing to try. "I'm picking it up now," he narrated gently. "Just picking it up." He lifted the syringe slowly. Maple's pupils widened, her breath catching in her throat. Her grip on his wrist tightened for a heartbeat, then loosened again. Caleb kept the syringe angled away from her body, showing her the harmless end first. "See?" he whispered. "It's small, and I'm not using it yet. I'll show you everything before I do." Maple leaned forward, not to block him this time, but to inspect. She sniffed the plastic barrel, tapped it cautiously with the very tip of her paw, then looked up at Caleb as if asking, "Why must this be part of today?" He spoke softly, his voice a warm tether. "We need to check your levels. Make sure you're really healing inside. One quick draw. I promise you. Quick." Maple held his gaze. Her eyes shimmered with a depth that made Caleb's throat tighten. She remembered the last time sharp metal touched her. She remembered being restrained, pressed down, helpless. She remembered not being given a choice. But here, today, she had a choice, and she chose to stay. Caleb gently repositioned himself and set a clean gauze pad nearby. Maple's attention followed every move, but she didn't stop him. She simply lifted her chin, giving him access to her forelimb, her pride refusing to let fear decide for her. "You're doing so well," he whispered. Olivia wiped at her eyes, pretending she wasn't emotional. Caleb placed his fingers along Maple's leg, feeling for a good vein. Maple's body tensed. Her breath stuttered, and she made a small noise, barely audible, almost a tiny plea. Caleb froze, letting her process the moment. "I'm right here," he murmured. "You're in control. If you pull away, we stop. If you stay still, it's just 1 second." Maple pressed her paw onto his wrist again, firmer this time, as if anchoring herself to him. Her eyes softened in a way he had never seen. She was ready. Caleb slid the needle in with quiet precision. Maple flinched once, her breath breaking into a short trill. Not pain exactly, but surprise, fear, and trust blending into one trembling note. She didn't pull away. She didn't panic. She didn't fight. She let him finish. When it was done, he withdrew the needle and pressed the gauze against her leg. Maple's ears twitched, but she stayed still, staring at him with something raw and unguarded. "It's over," he whispered. "You did it." Maple's shoulders finally eased. A slow exhale left her body, her tongue flicking out to lick the fur near her paw, a self-soothing habit returning after years of absence. She looked at Caleb again, and for the first time since he'd met her, she lowered her head and rubbed her cheek against his forearm. A gesture of trust, a gesture of acceptance, a gesture of peace. Olivia gasped. Caleb, she's thanking you. He swallowed the emotion rising in his throat. No, he murmured. She's trusting me. That's bigger. Maple leaned into his arm again, her small, warm body vibrating with a low, steady rumble. Not the nervous purr she'd made during early treatments, but something deeper. A sound of release, a sound of healing. Caleb rested his hand gently along her back, his voice thick as he whispered, "Good girl. You're stronger than you know." Maple closed her eyes. Not tightly, not defensively, but softly, as though letting herself rest for the first time in a long time. Her tail wrapped loosely around her paws. Her breathing steadied. She was no longer guarding the room or the tools or her memories. For this one moment, Maple let herself be vulnerable. Olivia let out a shaky laugh. So this is what victory looks like, with a bobcat wearing the pants. Caleb smiled. She's not wearing the pants. She's teaching us how to fit into them. Maple opened her eyes at the sound, blinking slowly, and tapped the gauze pad as if to announce the exam officially complete, on her terms and with her approval. Caleb bowed his head slightly. Yes, boss. We're done. Maple sat tall again, back straight, dignity restored. But something in her had shifted forever. She wasn't just supervising now. She was connecting, healing, choosing him. The exam room felt different, warmer, safer, sacred in a way Caleb had never experienced in all his years of veterinary work. Because Maple, traumatized, brave, wise Maple, had just done something extraordinary. She had trusted him with the part of her heart she protected the most. And in that quiet, breathtaking moment, Caleb understood just how much it meant. He wished the moment could linger. Maple calm, Maple steady, Maple choosing connection over fear. But life, especially life with a survivor like Maple, rarely let peace last long. Trauma had its own clock. It ticked unseen, buried deep until something seemingly small shook the world back open. And in Maple's world, nothing shook it open faster than the sight of someone leaving. Olivia stepped toward the counter, her movements light and routine. She picked up the labeled vial of Maple's freshly drawn blood, gave Maple a gentle smile, and said, "I'll run this to the lab. Be right." Her hand touched the doorknob. The metal gave a soft click. What happened next broke the room open like thunder. Maple's head snapped toward the sound with a violence Caleb had never seen in her, not even earlier when the syringe frightened her. Her ears flattened, her tail lashed, and her muscles contracted so suddenly she seemed to shrink and expand at once, like a creature torn between fight and flight and realizing she couldn't afford either. Then she launched. Not at Olivia, not at Caleb, but at the door. She hit the wood with her full weight, small but fierce, scratching, pawing, yowling with a sound so sharp and desperate it sliced straight through the sterile air of the clinic. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't anger. It was panic. Raw, wild panic. The sound of remembering being alone. Caleb stood instantly. "Olivia, don't open it!" "I'm not!" she gasped, stepping back in shock. Maple dug at the gap beneath the door, as if trying to follow Olivia wherever she might go. Her cries climbed in pitch, broken and pleading. The same bobcat who minutes ago had held her head high with unshakable dignity now dissolved into frantic, terrified motion. "Maple," Caleb said softly, approaching with slow, measured steps. "Maple, sweetheart, look at me." She didn't, couldn't. Her mind had slipped somewhere he couldn't follow, back into the woods, back into the days she spent trapped in wire and silence, back into the hours where no one came, where every sound was a threat or a heartbreak. Her claws raked the door, not wildly, but insistently, as though she believed that if she tried hard enough, she could stop Olivia from disappearing forever. It wasn't the door she was fighting. It was abandonment. Caleb dropped to one knee again, placing himself low, calm, steady. Maple. Maple. I'm here. Her cries faltered, just barely. Her ears twitched at the familiar voice, one thread of recognition slipping through the fog of panic. Maple, he repeated, softer still. Turn around. I'm not leaving. Olivia's not leaving. You are not alone. Olivia's voice trembled as she whispered from behind him. Caleb, she thinks I'm abandoning her. I know. Maple froze mid-scratch, her paw suspended against the wood, as if time itself had paused around her. She breathed hard, too hard, her ribs rising sharp and uneven. Then she turned her head just slightly, her gaze shooting back toward Caleb with a fractured, trembling intensity. Her eyes were wide, not the bossy, supervisory wide, not the assessing wide. These were the eyes of a creature who had been left before. Caleb extended his hand toward her, not to touch, just to exist in her line of sight. Come here, he murmured. I'm right here. Maple backed away from the door slowly, her steps uneven, her breathing ragged. She didn't run to him. She didn't leap. She simply walked. One step, two, three, before stopping in the center of the room, trembling. Her gaze darted from Caleb to Olivia and back again, her chest heaving. Good girl, Caleb whispered. You're safe. But Maple didn't move toward him, not yet. She circled the exam table once, tail low, her claws clicking softly against the tile. Her breath came in short bursts, and the panic didn't leave her eyes. She looked like she was searching, looking for proof that he truly hadn't disappeared, truly hadn't abandoned her. And then she saw him. Still kneeling, still steady, still there. Maple's expression broke. Caleb saw it in the minute shift of her whiskers, the tiny drop in her shoulders, the way her ears eased forward, as if letting in just a little comfort. She stepped toward him slowly. 6 feet. 4. 2. Then she stopped directly in front of him, standing stiff and shaking, and lifted one trembling paw. She didn't place it on his wrist this time. She lifted it higher, slowly, painfully, slowly, until it pressed flat against the center of his chest, right over his heart. Olivia covered her mouth. Oh my goodness. Caleb didn't breathe. He let Maple feel his heartbeat, steady, strong, unchanged. Her paw was barely touching him, but it held a weight heavier than any instrument in the room. Maple pressed her forehead into his collarbone then, not rubbing, not seeking affection, just anchoring herself to the one constant she could find in the chaos. He whispered, I'm here. I'm here, Maple. I'm not going anywhere. Her trembling began to quiet. Her breath slowed. Her tail, still low, loosened just an inch. The panic didn't disappear, but it softened, like a storm fading into a slow rain. Finally, Maple sank to the floor, not collapsing, but settling deliberately at his feet, leaning her shoulder against his knee. She looked toward the door one last time, her ears flicking cautiously, then looked up at Caleb again. This time, her eyes held something different. Not suspicion, not authority, not even fear. Relief. Olivia lowered herself to sit on the floor too, careful not to startle Maple. Sweet girl, she whispered, tears in her eyes. We're right here. Maple turned her head toward Olivia, lifting her chin. Then, in an act so gentle it stole the air from Caleb's lungs, she extended her paw and placed it on Olivia's knee. A mirror of the gesture she had given Caleb minutes earlier. A question. A plea. Are you staying too? Olivia nodded immediately, her voice shaking. Yes, I'm staying. Maple's eyes softened, and she shifted closer to Caleb again. Her world had cracked open at the sound of a turning doorknob. It was not the door she feared. It was the meaning behind someone walking through it. The memory of being left, hurt, forgotten. The unbearable silence that follows abandonment. And Caleb finally understood the full truth. Maple didn't just supervise because she needed control. She supervised because she needed certainty. Certainty that people stayed. Certainty that she mattered enough for someone to remain. Certainty that she would not be left behind again. Caleb placed a hand gently on her back, speaking the only promise that mattered. "We're here, Maple, and you're not alone anymore." She closed her eyes, just for a moment, and for the second time that day, she let herself believe it. But belief, Caleb knew, was fragile, and in the days that followed, he found himself waking each morning with the same quiet worry pressing against his ribs. How long would Maple hold on to that belief once she had to leave the clinic? Her recovery had progressed flawlessly. Her strength had returned. Her appetite was steady. Her wounds had healed so cleanly they seemed like faint whispers of what she'd survived. The Red Canyon Wildlife Sanctuary had finally called. Maple's new enclosure was ready, her habitat prepared, and her transition scheduled. It was supposed to be good news. It felt like a countdown. On the morning of her transport, Caleb lingered longer than usual in the exam room where she had spent so many hours supervising, testing, trusting. Maple sat on the table, posture tall, eyes watching him with her usual intensity. But there was something softer beneath it. A recognition. A familiarity. A bond that had grown in the quiet spaces between fear and patience. Olivia stood by the door, her arms crossed, her expression torn. "I hate this part," she murmured. "Saying goodbye never gets easier." Caleb nodded, tracing a gentle line along Maple's shoulder. "It's what's best for her." He said it because it was true. He said it again because he needed to hear it. He said it a third time because his heart didn't fully believe it. Maple pressed her forehead lightly against his arm, a gesture that had become her unique way of saying "te with mo." Caleb breathed in, steadying himself. "You're going to love the sanctuary," he said softly. "More space, more trees, more places to nap and judge everyone from above." Olivia laughed under her breath, blinking back the shine in her eyes. Maple flicked an ear at the sound, unimpressed by the attempt at humor. When the transport team arrived, Maple stiffened instantly, not with panic, but with vigilance. Two sanctuary workers approached the room with calm, slow steps, speaking in low tones. They carried no traps, no nets, no harsh equipment, just a reinforced carrier lined with soft blankets and open front bars so Maple could see everything. Caleb had insisted on that detail. Maple's tail flicked once, twice. Her gaze darted toward the door behind the workers, then back to Caleb. She made no move to flee, but her ears angled back slightly, a warning she was willing to cooperate only if the process remained predictable. "It's okay," Caleb whispered, placing his hand where she could see it. "You'll be safe. They'll show you everything before they do it. Just like we do." The transport lead, a woman named Marie, crouched down and opened the carrier door wide. "Whenever she's ready," she said. "We don't rush." Maple surprised all of them. Without prompting, without hesitation, she stepped forward, sniffed the carrier, tapped the front bar with her paw, her signature inspection, and then climbed inside. Marie blinked. "Well, that was the easiest transition I've ever seen." Caleb exhaled, his shoulders sagging in relief and heartbreak all at once. Maple turned inside the carrier and fixed her golden eyes on him. She tapped the bar again. He placed his fingers on the bar opposite hers, their touch separated by metal, but connected in meaning. I'll see you soon, he murmured, and Maple, in the smallest motion, dipped her head. The drive to Red Canyon felt longer than it was. Caleb stared out the passenger window, fingers tapping anxiously against his knee. Olivia drove in silence beside him until finally she said, "She's stronger than you think. She'll be okay." "I know," Caleb said. What he didn't say was the truth twisting in his chest. "I just hope she doesn't think we abandoned her." An hour later, the sanctuary's red cliffs rose into view. Tall pines bordered the entrance, and the winding gravel road led toward several expansive enclosures designed to mimic natural forest terrain. Marie met them at the gate, her smile bright. "She settled the moment we arrived. You two should come see." Caleb's heart jumped. "Already?" "She's supervising," Marie said, almost sheepishly. They followed her down a path lined with tall fencing until they reached Maple's enclosure. Spacious, sunlit, dotted with boulders, logs, and platforms. A small shelter sat near the back, but Maple wasn't hiding inside it. She was perched on a flat rock near the center, tail curled neatly around her paws, posture regal and alert. A sanctuary worker nearby was setting out Maple's breakfast, a bowl of fresh meat, and Maple watched every movement with the intensity of a foreman inspecting construction work. The worker placed the bowl down and stepped back. Maple didn't eat. She lifted her paw, tapped the bowl once, twice, then leaned forward to sniff it. Only after completing her internal checklist did she take a bite. Olivia let out a soft laugh. "She's auditing them now." Marie grinned. "That's not all. Come look at this." She led them around the enclosure to where another staff member was raking leaves near Maple's shelter. Maple watched him too, head tilting with every scrape of the rake. When the worker reached for a fallen branch, Maple hopped off her rock, approached him, and placed her paw on the branch. The man froze, looked at Maple with exaggerated caution, then held the branch still so she could inspect it. Maple sniffed, tapped it with her paw, and stepped back, satisfied. Marie crossed her arms. "She won't let us change anything in her space without showing her first. She insists." Olivia nudged Caleb. "She's running the sanctuary now." But Caleb felt something deeper bloom in his chest. Warmth, pride, and a sense of wonder. Maple wasn't panicked. She wasn't lost. She wasn't reliving old wounds. She had turned her need for control into confidence, into leadership, into the adorable, bossy little nature that made her Maple. "She's not afraid here," Caleb whispered. "She's thriving." Marie nodded. "She supervises feeding, cleaning, enrichment, even our morning check-in rounds. The team loves her for it. She makes them more careful, more mindful, and the other animals seem calmer when she's watching. It's like she's our little guardian." Caleb pressed his palm against the fence, watching Maple settle back on her rock, chin lifted, eyes scanning her domain. She seemed peaceful, not the kind of peace that comes from stillness, but the kind earned through reclaiming power over her world. Olivia wiped her eyes discreetly. "She's going to help a lot of creatures here. I can feel it." Caleb swallowed hard, the sight of Maple silhouetted against the red cliffs filling him with a rare and profound certainty. "She's not the scared bobcat we met in that exam room," he said softly. "She's something else now." Marie smiled. "She's Maple, the sanctuary's tiniest supervisor." As Maple watched a staff member adjust a water dish, evaluating, approving, guiding in her silent, authoritative way, Caleb realized something. She hadn't been running the clinic because she was afraid. She had been practicing, preparing, growing, becoming. And now, in this new place with new people and new routines, Maple had stepped fully into who she was always meant to be. Not a victim, not a patient, Not even just a survivor, but a protector, a watcher, a tiny boss with a heart built from fire, precision, and unexpected love. That was Maple now. Not just a resident of Red Canyon Sanctuary, not just another rescued bobcat learning how to adapt, but a presence, a force, a quiet, steady overseer who believed, deep in her bones, that safety came from paying attention. And she did, with a devotion that no one had expected. Caleb's next visit came one crisp morning 2 weeks later, when the red cliffs glowed under the rising sun and the cool desert air felt like it carried secrets. He walked the familiar gravel path with Marie leading the way, Olivia trailing with a notebook, though neither of them really knew what she planned to write down. Maple had become unpredictable in the most delightful ways. "Just wait," Marie said, a smile tugging at her cheeks. "She's taken on a new role." "What, lead inspector of breakfast bowls?" Olivia teased. Marie laughed. "Oh, she's gone way beyond food." They arrived at the veterinary building, a modest structure beside the sanctuary's larger enclosures. Through the half-open doorway, Caleb heard soft murmurs, a rustle of paper, and then a familiar trill. Maple's trill. Marie gently pushed the door open. "See for yourself." And there she was. Maple sat perched on a low counter, tail neatly curled, posture tall and attentive as she watched the sanctuary veterinarian examine a young fox with an injured paw. Maple's eyes tracked the vet's movements with laser focus. Each time the vet reached for a new instrument, Maple leaned slightly forward, as if mentally checking off steps in a procedure she believed she already had mastered. The fox pup trembled faintly on the table, scared, uncertain. But every time Maple made a soft trill or blinked slowly, the little fox relaxed, just barely. Olivia clasped her hands to her chest. "She's helping him stay calm." "She does that with all the small rescues now," Marie whispered. "On checkup days, she walks herself into this building and hops up on that counter like she's clocking in for work." The vet looked over his shoulder and grinned. "Morning, Maple's fan club. You're just in time to watch her supervise." Maple flicked an ear at the playful remark, but didn't shift her gaze from the fox. When the vet lifted the tiny paw to clean it, Maple extended her own, placing it gently on the counter, as if demonstrating the correct posture for holding steady. Caleb's throat tightened at the sight. "She's doing exactly what she used to do with me," he murmured. "But she's not scared anymore. She's doing it for him." And Caleb realized Maple's vigilance had changed shape. It wasn't survival now. It was service. The fox pup let out a tiny whimper when the vet applied ointment. Maple responded immediately with a soft, soothing purr, her golden eyes softening. The pup calmed within seconds. The vet chuckled. "See? Assistant Maple is better at emotional support than any tech I've ever had." Maple lifted her chin proudly, approving the sentiment. When the exam ended and the fox pup was carried back to recovery, Maple hopped down with a seriousness that would have made anyone laugh if it weren't so heartfelt. She padded toward the door, pausing to glance back at Caleb, Olivia, and Marie, her expression unreadable but somehow full of meaning. Marie lowered her voice. "Follow her. She wants to show you something." Maple led them outside, weaving gracefully through the sanctuary pathways. She stopped at different enclosures, as though performing her own version of rounds. At each pen, she paused, ears forward, watching the animals inside with an attentiveness that looked almost maternal. An older lynx with a limp approached the fence. Maple pressed her forehead briefly against the wire, a gesture Caleb had come to understand as her offering comfort. The lynx relaxed visibly before returning to his shaded corner. "That happens every morning," Marie whispered. "It's like she checks to make sure everyone made it through the night." Maple continued down the path, stopping next at a young deer's enclosure. The deer paced nervously, unused to the sanctuary and still adjusting. Maple sat outside the fence, still as a statue, watching him until finally the deer slowed, then stilled, then lay down in the patch of grass near her. Olivia wiped her cheek. She's supporting him. She's being what she needed when she came here. Caleb felt his chest tighten, not from pain, but from a deep, heavy tenderness. Maple wasn't just coping anymore. She was transforming. In the very spaces where she had once felt helpless, she now stood with confidence. And others leaned into that confidence. They reached the last enclosure, a small habitat housing a raccoon that had undergone surgery the day before. Maple approached slowly this time, her posture gentler. The raccoon squeaked nervously when the wind rustled a leaf nearby, but Maple simply lowered herself into a lying position just outside the fence. A long, low rumble of a purr rolled out of her chest, a calming rhythm, steady as a heartbeat. The raccoon quieted. The sanctuary director stepped up beside them, arms folded. "We didn't plan this," she murmured. "But the animals respond to Maple in a way we can't quite explain. She's become our emotional barometer." Caleb swallowed hard. "She's turning her trauma into guidance." "Exactly," the director said. "She isn't trying to control things because she's afraid anymore. She's watching over everyone because she cares." Maple lifted her head then, her eyes meeting Caleb's across the sunlight-dappled path. Her gaze held the same fiery intelligence he had seen on that first exam morning, but something had changed behind it. An openness, a steadiness, a sense of purpose. She walked toward him, each step deliberate. When she reached him, she placed one paw on his boot, her silent greeting. Olivia laughed softly. "Promotion from wrist to shoe. She must really like you." Caleb knelt, letting Maple rest her paw against his knee now. "You're doing important work here," he whispered, "making others feel safe." Maple blinked slowly, accepting the truth of his words. He realized something then, something so simple and profound that he wondered why he hadn't seen it sooner. Maple wasn't just surviving. She wasn't even just healing. She was becoming the guardian she once needed, a small, fierce, watchful healer of fragile hearts. And the sanctuary, her sanctuary, was better for it. Word of Maple spread quietly but steadily, first through the staff, then through volunteers, then through the small network of therapists and counselors who sometimes partnered with the sanctuary for specialty visits. They talked about her presence, her patience, her uncanny ability to sense distress in others. They talked about the way frightened animals stilled under her gaze, and how she seemed to breathe calm into any creature trembling in uncertainty. And somewhere in a small home on the outskirts of Flagstaff, a little girl named Evan heard Maple's story. Evan was 10 years old, with gentle hands and eyes that rarely looked up from the floor. Anxiety had woven itself tightly into her life. Crowds frightened her, unfamiliar places overwhelmed her, and separation from her parents sparked spirals of fear she couldn't untangle. She barely spoke above a whisper most days. But when her therapist showed her a photo of Maple, a bobcat perched on a rock, regal and alert, with a softness in her eyes that didn't erase the strength in her posture, Evan reached out and touched the picture with the tips of her fingers. "She looks like me," she whispered. Her parents exchanged a glance. "You mean small?" "No," Evan said quietly. "She looks like she's scared, but she's brave anyway." The sanctuary director received the request the next morning. Caleb was asked to come for Maple's regular follow-up on the same day. Part coincidence, part deliberate plan. They wanted him there. "Maple responds to you," the director had said. "And this little girl, she might need Maple to respond." So Caleb drove out early, hands gripping the wheel, heart tighter than usual. Olivia rode beside him, watching the desert landscape roll by. "Think Maple will understand what's happening?" she asked. Caleb hesitated. Not in the way we understand, but in her own way? Yes, Maple feels things deeply. When they arrived, Maple was already out, sitting on her highest rock, surveying the sanctuary morning like a monarch greeting her kingdom. She spotted Caleb first. Her ears perked, her tail twitched, and she let out a soft trill. "She's happy to see you," Olivia whispered. But Maple didn't leap down or run to them. She stayed high, watching, waiting. Maple never rushed her moments. Everything she did had intention behind it. The director approached them. "The family is here. Evan's just outside Maple's enclosure. She's nervous, but she insisted on coming." "How's Maple doing with new people today?" Caleb asked. The director smiled. "She's been waiting at the front of the enclosure all morning, like she knew something was coming." Caleb glanced back at Maple, who now stared at something beyond him, someone approaching. Evan, a small girl with hair pulled into a loose ponytail, fingers curled tightly around her mother's hand. Her father stood on her other side, speaking softly to her. Evan looked pale, but determined in the fragile way of children who have decided, for the first time in a long time, that maybe something might help. When Evan reached the viewing glass, she didn't look around, didn't greet the adults, didn't say a word. Her eyes went straight to Maple, and Maple moved, slowly, intentionally. She stepped off her rock, landing with a silence only wild creatures possess. She walked across her enclosure, no hesitation, no fear, until she stood at the glass directly across from Evan. The little girl froze. Her breath hitched. Her eyes widened, filling with tears. She didn't blink away. "She came to me," Evan whispered. Maple tilted her head ever so slightly, studying the girl. Her tail curled around her paws. Every muscle in her body softened, like she was dimming her fire just enough to not frighten the small human standing before her. Evan lifted her hand, tiny, trembling, and placed it against the glass. A moment passed. Then Maple raised her own scarred paw, the same paw that had once been caught in wire, the same paw she'd used to block instruments, guide Caleb, and calm fragile animals, and pressed it gently against the glass, directly over Evan's hand. The girl gasped. A sob broke from her chest, but not of fear, relief. "She understands," Evan whispered. "She knows what scared feels like." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she pressed her palm against Maple's paw with more confidence this time. Caleb felt his chest tighten, the way it had the first time Maple pressed her paw to his heart. Evan's mother reached for her shoulder, crying softly. "Sweetheart, she likes you." "No," Evan said, shaking her head gently. "She sees me." Maple leaned forward, her forehead nearly touching the glass. Evan mirrored her, resting her head close as if sharing something sacred, something too private for words. The adults watched in silence. For Maple, this moment was instinctual, not planned. She saw a trembling creature, small and overwhelmed, and she did what she had taught herself to do. She offered presence. She offered steadiness. She offered understanding. "Look at that," Olivia whispered. "Two souls with the same wound." Caleb couldn't speak. His voice would break if he tried. The sanctuary director stepped beside him. "This is why she's special," she murmured. "She doesn't just guard. She doesn't just watch. She heals." Evan pressed her forehead more firmly to the glass, her palm steady over Maple's paw now, her sobs quieted to small trembling breaths. Maple held her ground, eyes soft, whiskers relaxed, her scarred paw never shifting from its place. Minutes passed like that. Long, quiet, beautiful minutes. When Evan finally stepped back, Maple mirrored her movement, lifting her paw from the glass, as though completing a ritual. The girl wiped her face, embarrassed, but Maple blinked slowly, a bobcat's gesture of acceptance. "Mom," Evan whispered, "can we come back next week? I want to see her again." Her mother nodded immediately. "Yes, as often as you want." Caleb placed a gentle hand on Evan's shoulder. "She really likes you," he said, "and she's very picky." Evan let out a tiny laugh, the first they'd seen from her all day. "And Maple?" She walked back to her rock, climbed to her perch, and sat tall, overseeing the sanctuary with a calmness that felt earned, deserved, honored. The director sighed. "She's no longer the one needing reassurance." "No," Caleb said softly. "She's the one giving it." As the family walked away, Evan kept looking back, waving lightly each time, and Maple watched until the very last glance, her tail flicking in a slow, steady rhythm. Caleb stood with Olivia and Marie, the three of them silent for a long while as Maple resumed her post on the highest rock. Finally, Caleb spoke. "She's not just healing," he said. "She's teaching us what healing looks like." Olivia nodded, wiping her eyes. "She's our tiny boss." Marie laughed softly. "The guardian of fragile hearts." Caleb watched Maple, pride swelling in a quiet, reverent way. "She supervises," he said, "because she cares." And Maple, as if hearing him, turned her head and met his gaze for a brief, shining second. She blinked slowly, approving him. One last silent order from the tiniest boss he'd ever known. Keep watching over them too. And together, Caleb, the sanctuary team, Evan, and every creature Maple would ever guide, they stepped into a future where a once wounded bobcat had become something extraordinary. A symbol of survival, a giver of courage, a healer shaped by fire, fear, and fierce, stubborn love. And now I want to hear from you. If Maple's journey touched your heart even a little, drop a simple 1 in the comments. If she completely stole it, give her a 0, because that's exactly how many seconds it took for this tiny boss to win us over. Your comments help these stories reach more people who need a little light today. And if you want to follow Maple and discover more incredible rescue stories just like hers, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We have so many unbelievable, heartwarming journeys ahead, and I'd love for you to be part of every single one. See you in the next story.